This is the story of how the next major war will probably begin, not with missiles or troops crossing a border, but with the lights going out, the phones going dead, and the internet going dark. According to the U.S. intelligence community's own public assessments, foreign hackers are already inside American water systems, power grids, and telecom networks, waiting for the order to strike. This is not speculation. It is the explicit warning from a joint advisory issued by CISA, NSA, and FBI on February 7, 2024. That advisory stated that Chinese state-sponsored cyber actors are seeking to pre-position themselves on IT networks for disruptive or destructive cyber attacks against U.S. critical infrastructure in the event of a major crisis or conflict with the United States. Let's unpack what that actually means, why experts believe it, and what a digital blackout would really look like. Modern militaries recognize 5 domains of warfare: land, sea, air, space, and cyber. NATO formally adopted cyber as the 5th domain at the Warsaw Summit in July 2016. The logic for opening a conflict in the cyber domain is straightforward. Cyber attacks degrade command and control, logistics, and civilian morale before a single soldier moves. Attribution is slow and deniable, which delays the enemy's decision to escalate. And in a scenario like a crisis over Taiwan, disabling water, power, and telecommunications inside the United States, or at forward hubs like Guam, could slow American military mobilization long enough to change the outcome. This is the strategic thinking behind what analysts call hybrid warfare. The term was popularized by retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Frank Hoffman in 2007. It combines conventional military force with irregular tactics, cyber operations, and information warfare. We already have a real-world example of how this opening move works. Roughly 1 hour before Russian ground forces crossed into Ukraine on February 24, 2022, Russian military intelligence hit the American satellite company Viasat with wiper malware called Acid Rain. The attack crippled Ukrainian military and government satellite communications at the exact moment the invasion began. The spillover effects bricked around 5,800 wind turbines in Germany and knocked tens of thousands of modems offline across Europe. The European Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States publicly attributed the attack to Russia's GRU on May 10, 2022. That is the template. Cyber strike first, kinetic force second, 1 hour apart. In May 2023, Microsoft and the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance went public with news that alarmed cybersecurity professionals across the Western world. They disclosed a Chinese state-sponsored hacking group named Volt Typhoon. Volt Typhoon was not stealing data. It was doing something much stranger. It was burrowing into American critical infrastructure, water utilities, energy companies, communications networks, transportation systems, and facilities on Guam, and then just sitting there, quietly, for years. The technique is called living off the land. Instead of using custom malware that antivirus software might detect, the hackers use legitimate tools already built into the systems they compromise. The February 2024 joint advisory from CISA, NSA, and FBI stated that in some victim networks, Volt Typhoon had maintained access for at least 5 years. 5 years of silent presence in American infrastructure that has no intelligence value. Water treatment plants do not hold classified secrets. The only logical reason to be there is to be ready to break things when the order comes. At the January 31st, 2024 hearing of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, FBI Director Christopher Wray laid it out plainly. He said, China's hackers are positioning on American infrastructure in preparation to wreak havoc and cause real-world harm to American citizens and communities, if or when China decides the time has come to strike. Wray also testified that the People's Republic of China has a bigger hacking program than every other major nation combined, and that Chinese hackers outnumber FBI cyber personnel by at least 50 to 1. At that same hearing, then CISA Director Jen Easterly described the scenario this way. She said, "This is truly an everything, everywhere, all of once scenario. And it is one where the Chinese government believes that it will likely crush American will for the U.S. to defend Taiwan in the event of a major conflict there." If Volt Typhoon was the infrastructure threat, Salt Typhoon was the surveillance nightmare. Disclosed in October 2024, Salt Typhoon was a separate Chinese intrusion, this one attributed to China's Ministry of State Security, that had breached 9 U.S. telecommunications providers: AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Lumen, Charter's Spectrum, Consolidated Communications, Windstream, plus 2 unnamed carriers. The attackers accessed the lawful intercept systems that U.S. telecoms are required by law to maintain for court-ordered wiretaps. They collected metadata on more than 1 million users, mostly in the Washington, D.C. area, and the actual call and text content of fewer than 100 high-value targets, including staff on the Trump, Vance, and Harris campaigns, and senior government officials. Senator Mark Warner called it the worst telecom hack in U.S. history. Some assessments place the intrusions as far back as 2019. They had been inside the American phone network for years before anyone noticed. While the hackers are pre-positioning inside the networks, there is a parallel vulnerability nobody sees, because it is underwater. Over 99% of intercontinental data traffic travels through submarine cables. Roughly 570 cable systems, totaling about 1.5 million kilometers, carry essentially all international internet, phone, and financial traffic. Satellites carry less than 0.5%. The global repair fleet to fix these cables consists of around 60 ships, most of them more than 20 years old. Since October 2023, the Baltic Sea has seen at least 11 cable incidents. The pattern is consistent enough to be unmistakable. On October 7th and 8th, 2023, the Chinese container ship Nu Polar Bear, sailing from the Russian port of Ust-Luga with a Russian crew member aboard, dragged its anchor for over 100 nautical miles and severed the Baltic Connector gas pipeline between Finland and Estonia, along with telecom cables. The pipeline was offline for about 6 months. China eventually admitted in August 2024 that its ship caused the damage, but called it an accident. On November 17th and 18th, 2024, another Chinese bulk carrier, the Yipeng 3, also sailing from Ust-Luga, dragged its anchor roughly 160 kilometers with its tracking system turned off for 7.5 hours, cutting 2 more cables. In December 2024, a tanker in Russia's shadow fleet called the Eagle S dragged its anchor 62 miles, cutting the Estlink 2 power cable and telecom cables. A Finnish court dismissed that case in October 2025 because intent could not be proven. Anchor dragging is the perfect weapon for gray zone conflict. You cut the cable, you call it an accident, and the international legal system has no established framework to prove otherwise. NATO launched Operation Baltic Sentry on January 14, 2025, specifically to address this pattern. And it is not just the Baltic. In February 2023, two Chinese vessels severed both submarine cables connecting Taiwan to its Matsu Islands, leaving about 13,000 residents on degraded microwave backup for around 50 days. Those cables had been cut more than 25 times in the previous 5 years. In February 2024, the anchor of a cargo ship called the Rubimar, which had been struck by a Houthi missile in the Red Sea and was drifting before it sank, severed 3 major cables and disrupted around 25% of Asia-Europe data traffic. So what happens if these capabilities are activated? We have historical reference points. On December 23, 2015, Russian military hackers from the group known as Sandworm took out power for around 230,000 customers in Ukraine for between 1 and 6 hours. It was the first confirmed blackout caused by a cyber attack in history. They returned on December 17, 2016, with a more advanced tool called Indestroyer, the first malware ever built specifically to speak to industrial control systems, and it briefly knocked out a Kyiv substation. On June 27, 2017, Sandworm released NotPetya. The White House called it the most destructive and costly cyber attack in history. Total global damage was over $10 billion. Shipping giant Maersk lost around $300 million. Pharmaceutical company Merck lost around $870 million. FedEx's TNT division lost around $400 million. NotPetya was not even aimed at the West, it was aimed at Ukraine, and it spread out of control. On May 7, 2021, a Russia-based criminal group called DarkSide compromised a single legacy VPN account at Colonial Pipeline that did not have multi-factor authentication. They shut down 5,500 miles of pipeline that carried about 45% of the East Coast's fuel for roughly 6 days. 17 states declared emergencies. The company paid $4.4 million in Bitcoin. If you combine these, grid attacks, pipeline shutdowns, telecom outages, cable cuts, and satellite jamming, all happening simultaneously across multiple regions, that is the scenario the U.S. intelligence community is warning about. To be fair, not everyone accepts this framing. The phrase Cyber Pearl Harbor was coined by Defense Secretary Leon Panetta in a speech aboard the USS Intrepid on October 11, 2012. He warned of attacks that could derail trains carrying lethal chemicals, contaminate water supplies, and shut down the power grid across large sections of the country. That was more than 13 years ago. It has not happened. Security researcher Thomas Ridd's 2013 book, Cyber War Will Not Take Place, argues that no cyber attack has ever met the classical criteria for an act of war. Cyber activity, in his view, is better understood as espionage, sabotage, and subversion, not war itself. Bruce Schneier and others have argued that the Cyber Pearl Harbor framing is politically useful for defense budgets, but empirically unsupported by 15 years of actual incidents. Supporters of the prepositioning thesis have a counter-argument. The absence of a catastrophic cyber attack so far does not disprove the capability. It demonstrates restraint by capable actors holding their capabilities in reserve for wartime, which is, again, exactly what Volt Typhoon looks like. As of 2026, the situation has intensified. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence released its 2026 Annual Threat Assessment on March 26, 2026. It names China and Russia as the most persistent and active cyber threats, notes that North Korea stole roughly $2 billion in cryptocurrency in 2025 alone, and assesses that AI will accelerate cyber threats going forward. In November 2025, Anthropic disclosed what it called the first documented large-scale AI-orchestrated cyber espionage campaign. A suspected Chinese state actor had jailbroken Claude Code and used agentic AI to autonomously execute 80 to 90% of the tactical operations against around 30 targets, with roughly 4 successful breaches. The human operators were only making 4 to 6 strategic decisions. The rest was the AI, running at thousands of requests per second. Meanwhile, in February 2026, cybersecurity firm Dragos reported that Volt Typhoon had compromised devices on U.S. pipeline operational networks in 2025. Dragos CEO Rob Lee said sites compromised in the U.S. and NATO countries will never be found. So, will the next major conflict start with a digital blackout? The most rigorous answer the evidence supports is this: cyber is unlikely to be the sole instrument of catastrophic harm, but it is almost certain to be the first visible act of the next major interstate conflict. The Viasat attack, 1 hour before Russian tanks crossed into Ukraine, is the template. Volt Typhoon pre-positioning in U.S. water and power systems is the preparation. Salt Typhoon inside the telecom networks is the surveillance layer. Anchor dragging across the Baltic is the rehearsal for severing the cables. The question is not whether cyber will open the next war. According to the U.S. intelligence community, in the form of a joint advisory from its 3 top cyber agencies, the preparation has already happened. The question is whether defenders will recognize the opening move in time to respond before kinetic forces follow an hour later, because by then, the lights will already be out.